Okay, so it's Tuesday and it's March 31st, the last day of March. Still on coronavirus, still trying to get through this article by Edith Wharton. Though inclined in her post World War comments, World War I comments, to favor traditional roles for women, Wharton would surely have scoffed at the narrator's earlier claim that deep down in the very roots of the idea of sex, we come on that prime antithesis, the male active and aggressive, the female sedentary, passive, and receptive. What is revealing, however, is how even those texts with apparently radical anti bourgeois ideas could maintain essentialist ideas about sexual difference. Much has been made of Sophie's first name, which signifies wisdom, and her last, which signifies the pleasure of a symbaritic life. This duality seems to stand for an internal tension as the competing elements of mind and refinement and body and sensual pleasure wrestle for supremacy in her life. At first, the finer elements seem to triumph. She escapes the dreadful house in which she has been a reader for 5 years, following a quarrel with Mrs. Murrett. Darrow, having assumed she is Mrs. Murrett's niece, Sophie says that she can imagine nothing worse. He shares her judgment regarding the Murrett household as a blurred tapestry. It is a place of crystal gazing and hypnotism visited by Mademoiselle and Professor Didymus and the Polish Countess. It has provided Sophie with her only education after boarding school, and it has not been a good one. But she is not yet damned. After she angrily objects to a culture in which Lady Ulrica may enjoy the privileges of clothes, yachting, and travel, while she suffers the drudgery of straightening accounts, minding dogs, copying lists, Darrow confides that she had stuff in her. At this early stage in the novel, Sophie is determined to turn envy into achievement and seems another incarnation of Lily Bart, though crucially lacking the capital that is Lily's striking beauty. Other glimpses of Sophie, however, suggest a woman that the narrative is unsure about. Her indiscreet reference to Lady Ulrica, never daring to un, because she is an assembled beauty who comes apart like a puzzle, makes her blush with a mixture of envy and realization. For Lady Ulrica to remove her clothes before a lover would be to reveal the falseness that was hers from head to foot in Sophie's phase. The indiscretion of Sophie's comment is signaled by the narrator's refusal to write down the second part of the word that Sophie breaks in half. It is indelicate in mixed company to talk about women undressing. That would break the social code. The account of Sophie's upbringing, the tale of an orphan who loses even the small inheritance that her guardian had been promising, is a story of neglect and adult indifference. The Bohemian Farlows with whom Sophie has been staying after her traveling companion in Europe elopes with an American matinee idol, finds her a place with the turbid Mrs. Murrett in the false belief that the Chelsea house is the last of the salons. Sophie endures her 5 years there with a light-hearted philosophy that Darrow finds appealing. Lady Ulrica notwithstanding, Darrow does not generally approve of women who are clearly neither ladies nor of the other kind. He is suspicious of the third type, who shelter behind the privileges of one class to conceal the customs of another. But Sophie falls into the category girl, and Darrow decides that her experience had made her free without hardness and self assured without assertiveness. In that double edged phrase, she seems to have been acquainted with the real business of living. Later, during the 10 days they spend together in Paris, Darrow's impressions of Sophie are more critical. He notices how bored she is by art galleries and ideas, that it is the story that interests her most when they attend a play. Her description of her own sense of independence begins to irritate him, and the rhetoric here seems to be the narrator's as much as it is Darrow's. Besides, she rambled on, I'm not too sure that I believe in marriage. You see, I'm all for self development and the chances to live one's life. I'm awfully modern, you know. It was just when she proclaimed herself most awfully modern that she struck him as the most hopelessly backward. Yet the moment after, without any bravado of apparent desire to assume an attitude, she would propound some social axiom that could have been gathered only in the bitter soil of experience. The combination of annoyance and admiration is typical of the ambitious way in which Sophie is represented through Darrow's eyes. She's described in terms which emphasize her insubstantiality. She hung about him like a leaf on the meeting cross currents, that the next ripple may sweep forward or whirl back. Then she flung up her head with the odd boyish movement habitual to her in moments of excitement. This is the second reference to Sophie's boyishness. The allusion is also made when she is first introduced, and it may be of no significance. Most biographical accounts of the relationship between Wharton and Fullerton tend to assume that Wharton was ignorant of his bisexuality. It would be a mistake, therefore, to suggest that this is a coded reference to a practical kind of homoerotic sexual relationship, given that Sophie appears in the text and becomes, that Sophie reappears in the texts and becomes engaged to Owen. Furthermore, the boyish look with the bobbed hair and shapeless smock dresses was becoming fashionable with some young women. The epicene look clearly intrigued Wharton in Custom of the Country. The Princess Estradina is described as a bohemian in her dress, having traces of artificial color in her hair and mauve powder on her face. She, too, had an artificial color in her hair and mouth. She, too, has a boyish aspect, in the gait of a baker's boy balancing his basket. But this androgyny is not intended to suggest a straightforward sapphic inclination. The text is ambiguous. The princess is separated from a husband and has 2 daughters. But if the boyishness of Sophie in the Reef is not there to suggest the taboo of homosexuality, there is another transgression that is frequently hinted at. Whereas Sophie is in her early 20s, Darrow is 37 and nearly old enough to be her father. In Victorian and Edwardian Europe, such an age difference between lovers was neither unusual nor remarkable. Wharton's husband was 13 years her senior, and middle aged men often married very young women. The text often reminds us, however, that in Darrow's eyes, Sophie is very young indeed. Her behavior had all the indecision and awkwardness of inexperience. It showed that she was a child after all, and all that he could do, all that he had ever meant to do, was to give her a child's holiday to look back to. This did not prevent Darrow, who shares a first name with Wharton's father, from taking Sophie to his bed, however. And in the presentation of this betrayal of trust, there is more than a little of Humbert's rhetoric in Lolita. To Sophie, it seems an adventure on which she is willing to embark. We are told both by Darrow and by Sophie that there was no persuasion. On the other hand, there is nothing of the proud assertiveness and principle that characterizes the strong-willed Herminia. The willingness to enter a free union may be singular, but the constant reference to her childlike relation to Darrow is suggestive of the incest theme in Ethan Frome's Summer and the much-discussed fragment from Beatrice Palmetto. The depiction of Sophie is too complex for her to stand simply as a metonym for Bohemia. In some ways, it is surprising that Candace Ward, in her discussion of Wharton's use of the myth of Penelope, does not discuss Sophie, for the superficiality marches the image of women artists who has visited the underworld and leaves an ineradicable impression on those who remain above. She has tasted of the pomegranate seeds of eroticism, and the death of her parents causes her to be prematurely separated from her mother. Like the rival women haunted by the letters from their husbands' previous lovers in The Touchstone and in Pomegranate Seed, Anna is haunted by the knowledge that Darrow and Sophie have been lovers, and envies the knowledge and experience of sexual fulfillment and freedom that Sophie seems to have. And we're going to pause on page 197.